I woke up from my hip replacement surgery to the sound of hangers being yanked off the closet rod. My eyes flickered open slowly, the anesthesia still making everything feel like I was floating underwater. Through the blur, I could make out a figure stuffing my clothes into suitcases. It was my son, David. He was already checking his watch, tapping his foot impatiently. That's when my heart sank. Not because of the pain shooting through my hip, but because after everything we'd been through, after all the sacrifices I'd made, this was it. This was how our story was going to end. What David didn't know, what no one knew, was that hidden in my handbag was the letter from my private banker. $2 million, the culmination of 40 years of careful investments, property sales, and business. Ventures I'd built from nothing. But he didn't ask about my finances. He didn't even ask about my recovery. He just packed my bags and told me he couldn't take care of me anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed like angry wasps as I was wheeled out of the operating room. My vision still swam with medication, the walls of St. Mary's Hospital melting together like watercolors. The surgeon had said the procedure went perfectly, a titanium joint that would last 20 years. "You'll be dancing at your 90th birthday?" she'd joked, before the anesthesia pulled me under. I'd had no one in the waiting room. No worried family member pacing the linoleum floor, no friend clutching a get-well card. David had dropped me off with the same emotional involvement as someone leaving their car at the mechanic. "I'll pick you up when you're done," he'd said, already on his phone before I'd made it through the automatic doors. The recovery room was a maze of beeping monitors and hushed conversations. I occupied a corner bed, my silver hair spread across the thin hospital pillow like spilled moonlight. I was 78 years old, and this was my first major surgery. My body had always been reliable. Swedish stock, built for endurance, my mother used to say. But age had finally cornered me, demanding its due. As consciousness filtered back through the medication, memories began to surface like bubbles in champagne. I thought of the sleepless nights decades ago, bouncing baby David on my hip while balancing accounting books on our kitchen table. My husband had died when David was just 3 months old, a construction accident that left me with nothing but mounting bills and a wailing infant. The life insurance barely covered the funeral. Those early years were a blur of exhaustion and determination. I worked as a bookkeeper during the day, took night classes at Portland Community College, and babysat other people's children on weekends. David grew up in daycare centers and with various neighbors. "Mommy has to work," became my mantra, repeated. So often it lost all meaning. By the time David was 7, I'd saved enough to buy a small accounting business from a retiring client. It was nothing fancy, just me, a cramped office above a dry cleaner, and a steady stream of small business clients. I named it Carter and Associates, though there were no associates. It sounded more professional. The business grew slowly, carefully. I lived below my means, driving the same Ford Taurus for 15 years, darning socks until they were more patch than sock, turning down lunch invitations to save every penny. David went to public schools, wore hand-me-downs from our churches, clothing swap, and learned to appreciate the value of $1. Or so I thought. The first real rift came when David was 25. He'd graduated with a business degree, not from the Ivy League school he'd wanted, but from a solid state university. I'd put him through college by selling a property I'd quietly invested in years earlier. No student loans, no debt. I thought, I'd given him the best gift possible: freedom to start his adult life unburdened. Instead, he moved to Seattle for a startup opportunity that didn't work out, then to San Francisco for another job that was just temporary. Each time he called, it was for money. "Just a loan, Mom. I'll pay you back once I get settled." The amounts grew larger, $5,000 for security deposits, $10,000 for medical bills, $15,000 to help launch his own consulting business. I sent the money without hesitation. A mother's love knows no accounting. But somewhere along the way, David changed. Or maybe I'd been too busy working to notice the change happening. He became focused on status symbols, designer suits, expensive watches, a BMW he couldn't afford. He started criticizing my modest lifestyle. "Mom, you're almost 70 and still driving that ancient car. What are people going to think?" "I don't care what people think," I'd reply, but his words cut deeper than I admitted. Now, lying in that hospital bed, I felt the weight of all those years pressing down on my chest. The morning's events played in my mind like a grainy home movie. David had arrived 40 minutes late to pick me up, apologizing profusely but checking his phone every 30 seconds. In the car, he'd talked nonstop about his latest business venture, something involving cryptocurrency and vertical integration. "I've been thinking, Mom," he'd said, navigating through Portland traffic with practiced impatience. "Maybe it's time you consider downsizing. That house of yours is way too big for one person. The market's hot right now. You could probably clear 7 figures if you sell soon." 7 figures. He had no idea how close to the truth he was. The lawyer's envelope sat in my safe deposit box at Columbia Bank. Inside was the documentation for my real estate portfolio. 7 rental properties spread across Oregon and Washington, each generating steady income. The stock portfolio my late husband's modest life insurance had helped me build. The appreciation of that little accounting business I'd sold 5 years ago for $800,000. And then there was the inheritance from Aunt Margaret, the black sheep of the family who'd moved to Arizona and made a fortune in mining. Everyone was shocked when her will left everything to me. She'd seen something in me that perhaps I'd never seen in myself: resilience, determination, the ability to turn lemons into lemonade stands that eventually became shopping centers. $2 million after taxes. It had arrived 6 months ago, bringing my total net worth to something I still struggled to believe. I'd kept it quiet, not out of greed or secrecy, but out of caution. I'd seen what money did to families. I'd handled too many estates as an accountant to be naive about sudden wealth. I'd planned to tell David eventually, perhaps set up a trust for his future children, maybe help him start a legitimate business instead of these pie-in-the-sky ventures. That always seemed to fizzle out. But timing had never felt right. Every time I considered it, he'd ask for more money, display another frivolous purchase, or make another cutting remark about my poverty mindset. Now, medication wearing off, I realized the nurse had been speaking to me. "Mrs. Carter, can you hear me, dear? You're in the recovery room at St. Mary's. Your surgery went perfectly. Dr. Rodriguez will be in to check on you shortly." I nodded, my mouth as dry as cotton. She adjusted my pillows and checked my IV. "Is there anyone you'd like us to call? Family member? Friend?" "My son," I croaked. "David Carter. His number should be in my chart." "Already on it. We called him half an hour ago. He said he'll be here soon." An hour passed, then another. The recovery room began to empty as other patients were moved to regular rooms or discharged. Still no David. Nurses came and went, their smiles becoming tighter with each pass. Finally, at close to 8 p.m., 12 hours after they'd called, David burst through the doors like a tornado. Sorry. Traffic was insane," he panted, not looking particularly windswept for someone battling Portland traffic. His suit was crisp, his hair perfectly styled. He'd clearly found time to stop at a salon, or perhaps his business lunch had run long. He leaned down to kiss my forehead, the gesture feeling rehearsed. "How are you feeling, Mom? They said the surgery went well?" "Fine," I managed, though my hip throbbed with every heartbeat. "Just tired." "I bet. Listen, I hate to do this, but I can only stay a few minutes. Big meeting tomorrow morning. You understand, right? Business waits for no one." I nodded, familiar with this refrain. David had been climbing corporate ladders and chasing deals for the past decade, each opportunity being the one that would change everything. Yet somehow, he always ended up needing my help to bridge the gap between his ambitions and his reality. The doctor said I'll need help for a few weeks, I ventured. Physical therapy, getting to appointments, that sort of thing. About that. He pulled a chair closer, lowering his voice as if we were discussing state secrets. I've been thinking. This might be the perfect time for you to consider. Alternative living arrangements. My heart's rhythm faltered. Alternative arrangements? There's this great facility in Beaverton. Oak Manor. It's not a nursing home exactly, more like assisted living. Independent seniors, lots of amenities. I drove by it last week when I was in the area. Really lovely place. I just had hip replacement surgery, David. I'll be recovered in 3 months. I know. But Mom, you're 78. How much longer can you really maintain that big house? Stairs, yard work, cleaning. He ran his hand through his perfectly styled hair. It's just practical to think ahead. The medication was wearing off enough for me to see clearly now. My son wasn't concerned about my well-being. He was concerned about his inheritance. I'm not ready for assisted living, I said. Firmly. Just think about it, okay? I'll swing by the hospital tomorrow. We can discuss it more then. He left 10 minutes later, already back on his phone before he'd cleared the doorway. The nurse returned to wheel me to my room for the night. Son or husband? She asked conversationally as she navigated the gurney through the hospital corridors. Son. She tsked softly. Amazing how some people handle stress. Everyone's different, I suppose. That night, alone in the hospital room, listening to monitors beep and distant conversations in the hallway, I made a decision. When David returned tomorrow, I would tell him about the money, all of it. Maybe it would change his perspective. Maybe it would repair whatever had broken between us. Maybe it would show him that his mother wasn't the burden he seemed to think she was. In the morning, sunshine slanted through the blinds, painting optimistic stripes across my blanket. I'd been awake since dawn, rehearsing what I'd say. The door opened. David walked in carrying a small duffel bag instead of flowers or magazines. Morning, Mom. Got some good news and bad news. I waited, hope fluttering in my chest like a caged bird. Good news is, I found you the perfect place. Oak Manor had a last-minute cancellation. They can take you today. He set the duffel on the foot of my bed. Bad news is I can't help you move in. Seattle client emergency. Have to drive up there immediately. David, sit down. I need to tell you something important. Can't it wait? I'm really pressed for time here. He began pacing. Look, I've already talked to the discharge nurse. They'll help you get dressed. And I arranged for hospital transport to take you straight to Oak Manor. This isn't how I wanted this to go, but sometimes life forces our hand, right? David, please, just listen for 5 minutes. I have news that will— Mom! His voice snapped like a whip. For the first time since arriving, he really looked at me, but instead of seeing his mother, he seemed to see an obstacle. This is a business emergency. Actual money is on the line. Can we please just get you settled at Oak Manor and have this conversation later? The hope died, just like that. One small mercy was that my heart was too numb to break again. Fine, I said quietly. He let out a relieved breath. Great. I packed some of your essentials from home yesterday. Your meds, some clothes, toiletries. Everything else we can figure out later. 15 minutes later, he was gone. A nurse helped me dress, wincing sympathetically as I moved my stiff new hip. The hospital's patient transfer specialist, a kind woman named Patricia, explained that Oak Manor was expecting me and that my insurance would cover rehabilitation services there. Your son seems very organized, she offered, trying to make conversation. Yes, I agreed. Very organized. As I was wheeled toward the waiting transport van, I clutched my purse. Inside was my wallet, my phone, and the private banker's business. Card. James Morrison at First Republic Private Wealth Management. A man who knew my net worth better than my own son did. The irony struck me as the van pulled away from St. Mary's Hospital. I'd spent 40 years building a fortune to secure my son's future, and he'd spent 10 minutes securing my future in a place I'd never wanted to go. Oak Manor was precisely what David had described: lovely, well-maintained, and completely wrong. As the transport aide helped me into the lobby, I saw elegant furnishings, tasteful artwork, and several residents playing cards by a large window. A smiling administrator approached with a clipboard. "Mrs. Carter, we're so pleased to welcome you to Oak Manor. I'm Jennifer Watson, the admissions director. Your son called yesterday with your situation. Don't worry about a thing. We'll take excellent care of you during your recovery." She didn't need to tell me the weekly rate. My accounting mind did the math automatically based on the leather sofas and the fresh flower arrangements. David had committed me to spending approximately $8,000 per month of my money on a facility I'd rejected. "Actually," I said slowly, "there's been a misunderstanding." Jennifer's professional smile flickered. "I'm sorry?" "My son. He doesn't know my full circumstances. I won't be staying." The transport aide shifted uncomfortably. The admitting nurse hovering nearby looked confused. Jennifer's clipboard dipped slightly. "Mrs. Carter, you just had major surgery. The hospital wouldn't have released you without a solid care plan." "I'll handle my own care plan." I straightened in the wheelchair despite the pain it caused. "Please have your billing department send me any cancellation fees. I'll pay them directly." For the first time in my life, I understood the power of money wasn't in having it, but in how you chose to use it. And I was choosing not to use it to validate my son's dismissal of me. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. Not to call David. He was already speeding toward Seattle, his conscience clear, his mother handled. Instead, I scrolled to a number I rarely used. Martha Blackwood, my old friend from accounting school, whose daughter ran the most respected home health agency in Portland. "Martha, it's Elizabeth Carter. I need a favor. A big one. Within 2 hours, I had round-the-clock nursing care arranged for my home. A physical therapist scheduled for daily visits. A housekeeper lined up to help with shopping and cleaning. It would cost half what Oak Manor charged, and I'd be in my own house, surrounded by my own things, maintaining my independence. As I paid the Oak Manor cancellation fee, $500, chicken feed compared to what they would have charged over time, I realized David's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating my resources. It was underestimating me. That evening, settled back in my own bed, my new nurse, Rebecca, asked if I wanted to call anyone to let them know I was home. "Not yet," I said. "But I think I'll start making some phone calls tomorrow. Lots of them. Bankruptcy attorney would be first." David's cryptocurrency venture had red flags all over it. The private investigator would be second. If my son was living beyond his means, I wanted to know exactly how far beyond. And then, depending on what I learned, perhaps a consultation with my estate planning attorney. I'd spent 78 years believing that money followed love, that providing for family automatically equated to earning their respect and care. But as I lay there, surrounded by comfort I'd paid for myself, tended by care I'd arranged myself, I understood a fundamental truth. Love and money run on parallel tracks. They can travel in the same direction, but they rarely occupy the same space. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and harder truths. But tonight, I rested in the knowledge that I possessed something David couldn't calculate in his spreadsheets or negotiate in his business deals: the power to choose my own story's ending. The letter from my banker lay on my nightstand. $2 million couldn't buy back the relationship I thought I had with my son. But it could certainly buy me the dignity to live my last years on my own terms, and maybe, just maybe, teach my son a lesson about assumptions. His assumption that I was helpless, that I was broke, that I needed him more than he needed me. Perhaps the most valuable inheritance I could leave him wasn't money at all, but wisdom. Though getting him to cash that check might prove to be the biggest challenge of all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The morning light painted my bedroom walls in shades of amber and gold. Rebecca, my night nurse, had just finished her shift and introduced me to Maria, who would be my day caregiver. Both women were professional, warm, and most importantly, they saw me as a person, not a burden. "Mrs. Carter, I'll be back tonight at 9, Rebecca said, gathering her things. "Maria has my number if you need anything before then. Remember, the most important thing today is rest." After Maria helped me with my morning medications and a light breakfast, I asked for privacy to make my calls. I wasn't sure how long David would wait before checking up on my settling in at Oak Manor, but I wanted my investigation underway before he discovered my true location. First call, Jennifer Matthews, the investigator I'd found through my bankers. Recommendation. Her specialty was financial misconduct and asset tracking. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for calling. James Morrison spoke highly of you. What can I help you with?" I explained the situation carefully, keeping my voice steady despite the emotional undertow. "I need to know where my son's money is going. He presents himself as successful, but he's always asking for funds. I want to understand the full picture before making any decisions about my estate. I'll need some basic information to start. His full name, address, known associates, business ventures. And Mrs. Carter? This might take a few days to develop a complete picture." "That's fine. I'm not going anywhere." Next, I called Robert Chen, a bankruptcy attorney I'd referred clients to during my accounting days. He was known for his discretion and his encyclopedic knowledge of financial red flags. "Robert, this is Elizabeth Carter. I need your advice on a sensitive family matter." His warm chuckle carried through the phone. "Elizabeth, been too long. Family matters are often the most complex. Tell me everything." By noon, I had the wheels in motion. Maria brought me lunch on a tray, soup, crackers, and fresh fruit that looked nothing like hospital food. As she helped me adjust my pillows, she asked, "Will your son be visiting today, Mrs. Carter?" Something in her tone made me look up sharply. "Why do you ask?" Maria hesitated. "It's just..." The agency briefed me. "Your son's the one who called us, not knowing you'd already arranged your own care. He seemed surprised when we told him we were at your home address, not Oak Manor." My heart stumbled over its rhythm. "He called?" "About an hour ago. Said he was checking in on the arrangements. I explained that you'd hired us privately and weren't at the facility. He seemed..." She searched for a diplomatic word. "Confused." "I see." I set down my spoon carefully. "If he calls again or shows up here, you're to follow my instructions, understood? I'm not avoiding him, but I am controlling the narrative of our next conversation." The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Martha Blackwood, my old accounting friend, arrived with a box of homemade cookies and enough medical expertise to rival my nurses. She'd raised 3 children, all now medical professionals, and had an uncanny ability to spot when someone was hiding something. "You look remarkably well for someone who just had hip surgery," she observed, settling into the chair beside my bed. "But there's something in your eyes. Trouble with David?" I'd intended to keep things vague, but Martha had known me too long. The story poured out of me like water from a broken dam. She listened without interrupting, her face shifting from concern to anger to something that looked like determination. "You need more than an investigator," she said finally. "You need a family meeting, Elizabeth. Not an ambush, but a proper conversation where everyone knows where they stand. He doesn't even know I'm home yet. He thinks I'm at Oak Manor, safely stored away." Then let him think that. Just a bit longer. Martha pulled out her phone. My nephew Derek, you remember. Him? Works with corporate security at Intel. If David's involved in anything shady, Derek can find out faster than any private investigator. I don't want to spy on my own son. Knowledge isn't spying. It's protection. For both of you. That evening, as the sun painted Portland's skyline in watercolor pinks, my phone buzzed with a text from David. Sorry I couldn't visit Oak Manor today. Seattle took longer than expected. We'll call tomorrow to check on you. Hope you're settling in okay. The casualness of it struck me like ice water. There was no warmth, no genuine concern, just a box being ticked on his mental to-do list. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop, a birthday gift from David 3 years ago, delivered by courier with a card but no visit, and began researching his latest business venture. The cryptocurrency firm, Blockchain Innovations LLC, had a sleek website filled with buzzwords but precious little substance. The leadership team consisted of David and 2 other young men whose bios were heavy on ambition and light on experience. A knock at my door interrupted my research. Maria answered, then called up the stairs. Mrs. Carter, there's a package delivery. Requires signature. I'm not expecting anything, I called back. It's from David Carter. Labeled urgent. My pulse quickened. I asked Maria to bring it up. The box was large, branded with the logo of Portland's most upscale department store. Inside, wrapped in layers of tissue paper, was a luxurious bathrobe with a card. For your recovery. Thought you might need something comfortable at Oak Manor. Call me when you get this. David, the robe was beautiful. Cashmere blend, probably $300 or more. It was also a manipulation tactic as transparent as glass. Buy a gift, create obligation, standard playbook. I called him back immediately. Mom, did you get my package? I did. David, we need to talk about several things. Great. Listen, I can't talk long, about to go into dinner with the Seattle investors, but I'm coming to visit you tomorrow. Around noon, okay? I'm not at Oak Manor. Silence stretched across the line like a taut wire. What do you mean you're not at Oak Manor? I mean exactly what I said. I'm home, with private nursing care that I arranged myself. You can't be serious. Mom, you just had major surgery. You need proper care. I have proper care. 24-hour. Nursing, physical therapy, household help. Everything I need. That must be costing a fortune. That's the interesting part, isn't it? The assumption that I can't afford it. Another pause. What's that supposed to mean? It means we'll discuss it tomorrow. Noon is fine. I'll be here. I hung up before he could respond. My hand shook slightly from the confrontation, but there was steel beneath the trembling. I was 78 years old, but I wasn't finished fighting. That night, I dreamed of the early days, David as a toddler, chasing me through the small yard of our first house, laughing as dandelion seeds scattered in his wake. I woke to find tears on my pillow and Maria checking my vitals. Everything all right, Mrs. Carter? Just memories, I whispered. They sneak up on you at night. By 10 a.m. the next morning, Jennifer Matthews emailed her preliminary findings. I read them 3 times before calling her back. These credit card statements. You're certain? Completely. David Carter has been spending well beyond his visible means. The pattern suggests he's either hiding income sources or accumulating debt. The cryptocurrency venture appears to be more marketing than substance. I'm still tracking some offshore accounts that might tell us more. At precisely 11:45, a familiar BMW pulled into my driveway. I watched from my bedroom window as David checked his reflection in the side mirror, adjusted his tie, then took a deep breath before approaching the door. He looked like a man preparing for a performance. I'd dressed carefully, not in the hospital gown or the bathrobe he'd sent, but in a simple sweater and slacks. I was by the window in my home office, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Photos from my accounting business, awards from community organizations, certificates. From the real estate courses I'd taken after selling my company. Maria showed him up. His practiced concern melted slightly when he saw me looking so put together. Mom, you look good. Better than I expected. Than you hoped? He flinched almost imperceptibly. I just meant, after surgery, most people look more worn out. Most. People don't have $2 million to cushion their recovery. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. David's carefully composed expression shattered. For the first time in years, I saw my son's real face. Shock, confusion, calculation, and something else. Shame? I'm sorry. What did you say? You heard me correctly. Sit down, David. It's time we had an honest conversation. He sank into the chair opposite me, his usual confident posture replaced by something more tentative. Mom, I had no idea you had that kind of money. Why didn't you tell me? Because knowledge is power, and I wasn't ready to give you that power. Based on what I've learned in the past 48 hours, I made the right choice. What does that mean? I picked up the folder Jennifer had sent over that morning. It means I know about the credit card balances, the mysterious income sources, the investors in Seattle who aren't investors at all, but potential lenders you're courting, the 5 different bank accounts across 3 states. Should I continue? David's face drained of color. You've been investigating me? No, I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. For years, I've watched you scramble, borrow, and hustle. I've funded your dreams, your mistakes, your lifestyle. I thought if I just gave you enough support, you'd find your footing. But support isn't what you need, is it? Mom, please, let me explain. I'm not finished. What hurts most isn't the financial deception. It's the emotional bankruptcy. You tried to put me in a facility not because it was best for me, but because it was easiest for you. You thought you could manage my recovery like another item on your to-do list. David's hands gripped the arms of his chair. That's not true. I was trying to help. Help by committing me to spending $8,000 a month of my money without my consent? Help by packing my bags after surgery without asking what I wanted? Help by spending 45 minutes over 2 days with your mother after major surgery? I had business obligations. Yes, let's talk about your business obligations. Blockchain Innovations, LLC. 3 employees, including you. 0 revenue for the past 8 months. But somehow you're driving a BMW, wearing custom suits, and taking clients to 5-star restaurants. David stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're treating me like a criminal. I'm treating you like an adult who needs to face the consequences of his choices. Sit down. Something in my voice, perhaps the accountant who'd faced down angry clients, or the single mother who'd raised him alone, made him sink back into the chair. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. First, you're going to show me every financial statement, every business plan, every debt obligation. Complete transparency. Second, you're going to enter a financial literacy program. I'll pay for it, but completion is non-negotiable. Third, you're going to volunteer. 10 hours a week at a nonprofit. Your choice, but it must involve helping others, not networking for your next deal. Mom, I'm 35 years old. You can't. Give me rules like I'm in high school? You're right. I can't. But I can control what I do with my money, and what I do with my trust. His eyes widened. Trust? Did you think I hadn't planned for my death? There's a trust set up for you. Significant funds that would change your life. But trusts can be modified. They can be conditional. They can be dissolved entirely. The calculation in his eyes was almost painful to watch. So this is blackmail? This is consequences. The difference is that I'm offering you a path forward. Not the easy path you've been walking, but a genuine one. One that might actually lead somewhere meaningful. Silence settled between us like dust after an explosion. Finally, David spoke, his voice smaller than before. "When did you become so hard?" "The day I had to choose between grocery money and you having new sneakers. The night I worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. The moment I realized that love doesn't mean saying yes to everything. It means saying the right thing, even when it's difficult." I reached across the desk and took his hand. For the first time in years, he didn't pull away. "I don't want to lose you, David, but I won't be your bank. I won't be your backup plan. I won't be your burden. If you want a mother who's also your friend, your advisor, your cheerleader, earn it." The afternoon sunlight shifted, casting shadows across his face. In them, I could almost see the little boy he'd been, before life and loss had hardened us both. "I don't know if I can do all that," he admitted. "Then you're braver than I thought. Most people don't even admit their limitations." We talked for 2 more hours. Not about money directly, but about time. The decades between us, filled with misunderstandings and missed opportunities. He told me about the pressure he felt to succeed, the fear of becoming like the small-time hustlers who'd surrounded us when he was young. I told him about the loneliness of building a fortune with no one to share it with. By the time he left, promising to return with his financial records, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the desperate hope of a mother wanting her child to change, but the cautious optimism of an investor seeing potential in a risky venture. That evening, as Maria helped me prepare for bed, she asked if I felt better after the conversation. "Not better," I said, considering, "but clearer. Sometimes clarity is more valuable than comfort." Just before sleep claimed me, my phone buzzed one more time, a text from David. "Thank you for not giving up on me. I'll prove I'm worth the investment." I smiled in the darkness. My $2 million might disappear someday, invested, spent, or given away. But the lesson I was trying to teach my son? That was an inheritance that could compound indefinitely, if he was willing to accept it. The investigation continued, but now it felt less like surveillance and more like due diligence. And every small truth we uncovered was another brick in the bridge we were trying to rebuild, not back to what we'd been, but forward to what we might become. The physical therapy sessions were brutal. Every morning at 10 a.m., Patricia Warner arrived with her arsenal of exercises and equipment, transforming my living room into a makeshift rehabilitation center. By the 3rd day, my hips screamed protests I hadn't known my body could produce. "You're doing remarkably well for someone your age," Patricia said, helping me through leg raises on the 2nd Thursday morning. "Most patients take twice as long to reach this mobility level." "I'm motivated," I replied through gritted teeth. "I have unfinished business to attend to." True to his word, David returned that Friday with 3 banker's boxes and a laptop. His BMW idled in the driveway while he unloaded them, sweating despite the November chill. When I opened the door, his attempt at a smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's here, Mom. Every receipt, every statement, every email. It's a lot." "Then we'd better get started." I'd transformed my dining room into a command center. The mahogany table that had hosted countless dinner parties for my accounting clients now bore the weight of David's financial history. As he unpacked the boxes, I noticed his hands trembling slightly. "I want to explain some things before you look through all this," he said, gesturing to the mounting piles of papers. "Facts first, explanations later. That's how accounting works." For the next 6 hours, we sorted through his documentation. The picture that emerged was both worse and more complex than Jennifer's preliminary report had suggested. David's business. Ventures weren't just failing. They were a series of increasingly desperate attempts to cover previous losses. The cryptocurrency venture had lost $75,000 in the first month. To hide it from his early investors, he'd borrowed from a private lender at 18% interest. When that payment came due, He'd started a consulting business that existed only on paper, using new client investments to pay old debts. The classic Ponzi scheme structure, even if he didn't realize it. "David," I said finally, rubbing my temples as the afternoon light faded. "You're not an entrepreneur. You're a juggler who keeps adding chainsaws." He slumped in his chair, running both hands through his hair. "I know. God, I know. But what was I supposed to do? Tell my investors I'd lost their money? Watch everything? Collapse? You taught me to never give up. I taught you to work hard, not to work dishonestly." We paused for dinner. Maria had prepared a salmon casserole that I barely tasted. David picked at his food, occasionally glancing at the dining room where his financial skeleton lay dissected on the table. "Mom," he said finally, setting down his fork, "there's something else, something not in those boxes." My heart sank. "Go on." "There's a woman, a former business partner, Sarah Mendez. She's threatening to sue me for $150,000. Claims I misrepresented the returns on a real estate investment we did together." "Did you?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. "I didn't lie exactly. I just interpreted the numbers optimistically." The next morning, I scheduled a call with my attorney, Michael Goldstein. We'd worked together when I sold my accounting business, and his mind was sharp as Damascus steel. "Michael, I need to know the legal ramifications if my son has been running. What amounts to a Ponzi scheme, unintentional or not?" "Elizabeth, this is serious. If Ms. Mendez files that lawsuit and discovers the broader pattern of financial misrepresentation, David could face civil and potentially criminal charges. We're talking hefty fines, possibly even prison time." After the call, I sat in my study, staring at the framed photo of David in his college graduation gown. He'd been so full of promise then, talking about starting his own consulting firm, helping small businesses grow. When had that genuine aspiration twisted into this desperate charade? The following week brought unexpected developments. Jennifer Matthews called with information that shifted my entire perspective. "Mrs. Carter, I need to meet with you in person. What I've found is complicated." An hour later, we sat in my home office. Jennifer spread several documents across my desk. Bank statements, phone records, email transcripts. "Your son's financial troubles began exactly 3 years ago. Before that, his business ventures were small but legitimate. He was careful with money, even conservative. Then something changed." "What changed?" "He met Gregory Walsh. Walsh runs a business mentorship program that targets ambitious young professionals. The program promises networking opportunities, investment advice, and what they call prosperity mindset training. It costs $5,000 a month. Cult? Not exactly. But Walsh's method involves constant pressure to think bigger, risk bigger. He encourages members to leverage everything: homes, credit, family relationships. Several of his protégés have filed bankruptcy. 2 are facing fraud charges. The pieces click together like tumblers in a lock. David's dramatic personality shift started around that time. The aggressive spending, the constant need for capital. Walsh's program explicitly teaches that asking family for money is a sign of trusting your vision. They call it leveraging relational capital. That evening, when David arrived for our second financial review session, I confronted him with the information. "Tell me about Gregory Walsh." His face went ashen. "How do you know about Greg?" "I know you've paid him over $150,000 in the past 3 years. I know his program encourages you to view family as investors. I know at least 11 of his former members are now either bankrupt or facing criminal charges." David sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. He made everything sound so logical, so achievable. He knew successful people, had this whole system. At first, it seemed to work. Until it didn't. His son was brilliant. Got me thinking about leverage as a tool rather than a weakness. About how successful people always have access to capital they didn't earn. About how families should function as investment units. Families should function as families, I said quietly. When did that become confusing to you? What followed was the most honest conversation we'd had since his childhood. David revealed how Walsh had specifically coached him on approaching his mother for funds, how to frame requests around family loyalty and shared success, how to make it seem like my investing in him was actually a gift to myself. The worst part, David whispered, is that somewhere along the way, I started believing it, that I was actually looking out for you by getting you to invest in my future. The next day, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I called Gregory Walsh's office and booked a consultation for Mrs. Carter, representing herself as a widow with substantial assets interested in his mentorship program. His office in downtown Portland was exactly what I expected, floor to ceiling. Windows, leather furniture, artwork that was expensive without being tasteful. Walsh himself was charismatic in that polished way that sets off alarm bells for anyone who's spent decades in business. Mrs. Carter, thank you for coming. I understand you're interested in our Executive Prosperity Program. I smiled, playing the naive widow. My son David speaks so highly of your methods. I'm considering a significant investment and thought perhaps your guidance could help me maximize returns. Walsh's eyes lit up. For the next hour, he pitched his philosophy: leverage, bold vision, using relationships as capital. Everything Jennifer had described. He quoted Napoleon Hill and Robert Kiyosaki, sprinkled in neuroscience terms, and frequently name-dropped successful members of his program. What kind of investment are we discussing, if you don't mind my asking? Oh, I'm hesitant to mention specific numbers, I demurred, though my financial advisor did mention the recent $2 million I liquidated was just the beginning of my estate planning decisions. His follow-up questions came fast and probing. How much total wealth? Other family members? Real estate holdings? The consultation was scheduled for 30 minutes, but stretched to 2 hours as Walsh worked to secure me as a client. As I left, he handed me a packet of materials and his business card. Think about your son, Mrs. Carter. Imagine how proud he'd be to see you embracing the same bold mindset that's been driving his success. That evening, I recorded everything from the meeting, then called Robert Chen, my bankruptcy attorney. Robert, I need to understand something. If someone knowingly enrolls vulnerable people in a program that encourages them to commit financial fraud, what's their legal liability? Depends on proof of knowledge and intent. But if you could demonstrate a pattern of behavior resulting in financial losses for multiple participants, you'd have grounds for civil action. Potentially criminal if there's evidence of conspiracy to defraud. 3 weeks of careful investigation followed. David, to his credit, participated fully. We worked through his finances methodically, establishing a debt repayment plan and identifying which business relationships could be salvaged honestly. The breakthrough came when David agreed to testify about Walsh's methods. He wasn't the only former student willing to speak out. Sarah Mendez, his former partner, had already compiled evidence against Walsh after losing her retirement savings following his advice. By early December, we had enough documentation to file formal complaints with the Oregon Secretary of State's Business Division and the Consumer Protection Agency. David's cooperation became his redemption arc, from victim to whistleblower. I feel guilty, he confessed one evening after a particularly difficult therapy session. All these people I brought into Greg's circle, friends from college, gym, buddies, clients from my first consulting job, they trusted me. Guilt is useless without action, I told him. Keep helping build the case. Keep making amends where you can. Guilt for its own sake is just another form of self-deception. The physical therapy continued alongside the emotional rehabilitation. My hip grew stronger daily, and with it, my resolve. By mid-December, I could walk without a cane for short distances. My first real outing was to David's apartment, a stark space that reflected the hollowness of his recent years. "We're going to redecorate," I announced, surprising us both. "Not with money you don't have, but with purpose you're still finding." We spent that weekend painting walls, sorting through possessions, and making his space reflect actual values rather than projected wealth. The expensive watches were sold to help repay investors. The designer suits were altered to last longer. The false front was dismantled piece by piece. On Christmas Eve, Marilyn Thompson, my physical therapist Patricia's sister and the director of Portland's Women's Recovery Center, invited David to speak at their fundraiser. Having followed our story through Patricia, she thought David's journey from deception to truth might inspire others. I watched from the audience, tears in my eyes, as my son stood at the podium not with practiced charisma, but with genuine humility. "My name is David Carter, and I'm a recovering narcissist," he began, drawing surprised laughter. "For the past 3 years, I've been living in a fantasy built on other people's money and trust. My mother's money bought me time. Her forgiveness bought me a second chance." He spoke about Walsh's program, about the seductive nature of schemes that promise shortcuts to success, about the slow erosion of moral boundaries when you convince yourself that manipulation serves a higher purpose. "The hardest thing I've learned is that real success isn't about the story you tell others about your life. It's about the story you can honestly tell yourself before you fall asleep at night." After the event, several attendees approached David with their own stories of financial deception and recovery. He exchanged phone numbers, promising to share resources we'd compiled about ethical business practices and financial redemption. As we drove home that night, Portland's Christmas lights blurring past the car windows, David spoke softly. "I think I finally understand what you've been trying to teach me all these years." "What's that?" "That all the money in the world is worthless if you can't look at yourself in the mirror. That inheritance isn't about dollars. It's about the person you become to earn them." On January 1st, David started his volunteer work at a financial literacy nonprofit. By February, he'd enrolled in the same community college I'd attended decades earlier, taking courses in ethical business practices and personal finance. The cryptocurrency business was legally dissolved, with remaining assets distributed to investors. Walsh's downfall came swiftly once the state began investigating. By March, his mentorship program was shut down, and a class action lawsuit was filed by his victims. David's testimony proved crucial in establishing the pattern of fraudulent guidance. Through it all, my $2 million remained mostly untouched, a safety net that provided peace of mind rather than a piggy bank for quick fixes. We'd agreed that it would help start David's new consulting practice if and when he completed his education, but this time with proper funding, proper planning, and proper purpose. On the 6-month anniversary of my surgery, David arrived for dinner carrying a small wooden box. Inside was a handmade plaque he'd crafted in his evening woodworking class. "To Mom, who taught me that falling down doesn't matter. Getting back up with integrity does." As I hung it in my study, I realized our story wasn't about money after all. It was about the courage to demand better from those we love, and the wisdom to give them the tools to become better, rather than simply telling them to change. The investigation had uncovered fraud, deception, and manipulation. But it had also uncovered resilience, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and son willing to fight for their relationship's truth. Some inheritance checks clear immediately. Others take generations to cash. The one I was leaving David, the knowledge that integrity and hard work ultimately pay dividends that compound beyond anything money can measure, was finally showing signs of earning interest. The early morning. Call came at 5:47 a.m., jolting me awake despite my body's growing accustomed to post-surgery aches. "Mrs. Carter?" "It's Detective Angela Martinez with Portland PD's Financial Crimes Unit. Gregory Walsh was arrested 2 hours ago. He's claiming his victims were willing participants. Your son's testimony has become crucial." I sat up carefully, my hip protesting the sudden movement. David said he'd do whatever was needed. I need you to know something, ma'am. Walsh's attorney is going to paint David as a willing participant who's now turning on his mentor out of spite. They'll use his past deceptions against him. This could get ugly before it gets better. David arrived at my house by 8 a.m., his face drawn but determined. We'd developed a morning routine over the past weeks. Coffee in the sunroom while planning the day's challenges. Today felt different. The stakes had escalated overnight. Detective Martinez called me too, he said, hands wrapped around his mug, like a shield. They want me to wear a wire, meet with some of Walsh's current students, get them on record admitting the pressure tactics he uses. That's dangerous. These aren't just desperate professionals. Walsh has attracted some genuinely unstable people convinced they're on the verge of massive success. I know. He set down his cup and looked directly at me, a gaze clear of the calculated charm that had marked his pre-crash persona. But I brought these people into his orbit. If I can help bring even a few out. Your safety is not negotiable. Neither is doing the right thing. Isn't that what you've been teaching me all along? That week unfolded like a thriller novel. David met with 3 current Walsh students at various Portland coffee shops, each interaction recorded by the microphone taped to his chest. The conversations revealed Walsh's methodology with disturbing clarity. He makes you list every relative, every friend, every professional connection. Then he helps you craft approaches that make borrowing money seem like offering them an opportunity. The E. Pressure doesn't let up. If you hesitate to ask for money, he questions your commitment to success. He says your fear is the only thing holding you back from greatness. He had us write out scripts, literally word for word what to say to parents, siblings, friends. He said the right language could unlock financial resources we didn't even know we had access to. Each recording brought Walsh's manipulative system into sharper focus. More importantly, several students began questioning their involvement after talking with David. 2 withdrew from the program immediately. A third, terrified of Walsh's reaction, agreed to cooperate with the investigation. The stress took its toll on David. He began experiencing anxiety attacks, sweating through his shirts during meetings, jumping at unexpected phone calls. I found him one evening sitting in his car in my driveway, unable to enter the house. I keep thinking about all the conversations I had like that, he whispered when I tapped on his window. All the people I convinced to give me money, the lies I told myself to justify it. Walsh didn't invent my deception. He just gave it a manual. We started walking together in the evenings. My physical therapy had progressed to outdoor exercise. The November air was crisp, scented with wood smoke and wet leaves. Our conversations during these walks became the fulcrum for David's deeper healing. Mom, do you ever wonder who you'd be if Dad hadn't died? The question caught me off guard. We rarely discussed his father's death directly. Every day at first. Then time creates a kind of protective distance. Why do you ask? I've been thinking about how his death shaped both of us. You became this survivor, building something from nothing. Maybe I became this risk-taker, always trying to prove I could create something bigger than our loss. His insight struck me as both mature and heartbreaking. Your father would have wanted you to be secure, not spectacular. I just wanted to be someone you could brag about instead of worry about. We stopped walking. In the lamplight, his face held echoes of the boy I'd raised alone, the businessman he'd become, and someone else, someone still emerging. The day after his funeral, I said slowly, I went to his construction site. His foreman gave me a piece of lumber with his handwriting on it, measurements he'd drawn that morning. I kept it for years. I paused. Success isn't about the size of what you build. It's about whether it stands after you're gone. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Walsh's former business partner, a financial planner named Kevin Ross, approached David at the gym. They'd known each other casually. Walsh had tried involving Ross in his program years ago. Walsh just called me. Ross said, keeping his voice low as they used adjacent treadmills. He wants to know if I'll testify that you were his most devoted student. He's painting himself as a victim of overzealous followers who took his teachings too. David's response was immediate. Tell him you'll do it. I found out about this development when Ross visited my house that evening, accompanied by his attorney. They'd decided to work with the prosecution, but needed my advice on navigating Walsh's network without alerting him to their cooperation. My clients, wealthy families, business owners, several have been approached by Walsh's people. He targets financial planners to reach high net worth individuals. You were both targets and bait. The next 3 weeks revealed Walsh's operation was far more extensive than anyone had suspected. His program had tentacles throughout Portland's business community. He'd convince successful professionals to host prosperity workshops in exchange for a cut of student fees. Real estate agents, luxury car dealers, even therapists had been recruited to funnel ambitious clients his direction. David's undercover work expanded. Wearing increasingly sophisticated recording equipment, he attended one of Walsh's exclusive Inner Circle meetings, a $10,000 per month tier promising direct access to high-level wealth strategies. The recording from that meeting became the prosecution's smoking gun. Walsh explicitly coached attendees on exploiting family relationships. Your grandmother's nest egg isn't helping her. It's just sitting there, earning nothing. By borrowing it for a month to fund your next venture, you're actually doing her a favor. You'll pay her back with interest, and she'll feel needed. Isn't that worth more than letting that money go to waste? Parents feel successful when their children succeed. Frame your requests as giving them an opportunity to be part of your breakthrough. They don't want the money. They want to be relevant to your future. When David emerged from that meeting, he was physically ill. We spent the night reviewing the recordings with Detective Martinez and the district attorney's office. By dawn, additional search warrants were being prepared. The arrest came on a Tuesday morning. Walsh was taken into custody at his office, surrounded by his carefully cultivated success symbols. As he was led out in handcuffs, he maintained his polished composure, smiling for news cameras as if this were just another business networking opportunity. "This is all a misunderstanding," he told reporters. "I teach people to think bigger. If some students misapplied my methods, that's not my responsibility." But the evidence was overwhelming. Walsh's private files contained detailed profiles of students' families, including financial information, emotional vulnerabilities, and suggested manipulation tactics. His personal notes included strategies for dealing with skeptical parents and resistant siblings. The community's response was divided. Some victims came forward immediately. Others remained loyal, convinced Walsh was being persecuted for teaching unconventional wisdom. The local business community split between those who'd suspected something was wrong and those who defended Walsh as an innovative, if aggressive, teacher. David faced intense scrutiny. News outlets painted him as either a brave whistleblower or an embittered former student seeking revenge. The stress triggered his first panic attack in years, sending him to the emergency room with chest pains that turned out to be anxiety-induced. Sitting in that hospital room with him, ironically, the same hospital where I'd had my surgery, I watched my son grapple with the weight of accountability. "I keep wondering if testifying makes me a traitor or a truth teller," he confessed. Walsh gave me a framework for my ambition. Without him, I might have figured out healthier ways to push myself. Or you might have found another Walsh. There's always someone ready to profit from our desperate need to feel exceptional. His trial testimony was powerful precisely because it was unflinching. David didn't paint himself as purely a victim. He acknowledged his own predisposition to shortcuts, his willingness to bend truth, his relief at finding someone who sanctioned his deepest sins with the promise of ultimate success. "Mr. Walsh didn't create my capacity for deception," David told the court. "But he taught me to see it as a virtue, to view manipulation as marketing and exploitation as empowerment. He gave me permission to hurt people by calling it strategy. The trial lasted 6 weeks. During that time, our relationship deepened in ways I'd stopped hoping for. David moved into my guest house, the small cottage behind the main house that I'd built years ago as a potential rental property. We established new rhythms: morning coffee, evening walks, Sunday dinners where we actually talked about more than his latest scheme. He began seeing a therapist specializing in financial trauma. Through their sessions, patterns emerged that traced back to childhood. The pressure he'd felt as the son of a widow trying to prove he could fill his father's absence. The confused messages about money being both scarce and the solution to all problems. "I never told you this," he admitted one night over pasta I'd made. "But when I was 12, I overheard you crying about mortgage payments. I started stealing change from your purse to help. When that didn't make a difference, I decided I had to grow up to be rich enough that you'd never cry about money again." I set down my fork, throat tight with emotion. "I thought I was protecting you by hiding our struggles." "You were. But kids see everything, even when they understand nothing." Walsh's conviction on 17 counts of fraud brought mixed feelings. Justice? Yes, but also a sobering reminder of how many lives had been damaged by his teachings. Several of his former students faced their own legal troubles. Others struggled with debt and damaged relationships. David initiated a support group for Walsh's victims. They met weekly in a church basement, sharing stories and strategies for financial and emotional recovery. I attended the first meeting, watching my son, who once would have been too proud to admit any weakness, lead discussions about vulnerability, restitution, and rebuilding trust. 6 months after Walsh's conviction, I made a decision. David had completed his first semester of legitimate business courses with straight A's. He'd been sober from get-rich-quick schemes for 8 months. His volunteer work at the financial literacy nonprofit had evolved into paid consulting, helping other scam victims navigate recovery. "I want to start a fund," I told my estate attorney, "for Walsh's victims: counseling, debt restructuring, small business loans with accountability measures. I'll seed it with $500,000. See if others will contribute." "That's very generous, Elizabeth." "May I ask what prompted?" "My son's almost victims are someone else's children. If I can help break this cycle for even a few families." When I told David, he wept. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen during his deceptive years, but genuine grief and gratitude. "Mom, that money, you worked so hard for it. Money has no value until you use it for something meaningful. This feels meaningful." The fund announcement attracted media attention. Several local business leaders contributed, including 2 of Walsh's most successful former students who'd left his program early, recognizing its toxic core. The story evolved from a cautionary tale about financial predators to a narrative about community recovery. By the 1-year anniversary of my surgery, our lives bore little resemblance to that fraught November day when David had packed my bags for a nursing home he assumed I couldn't refuse. I now walked without assistance, my hip stronger than it had been in years thanks to rigorous physical therapy and determination. David had started a legitimate consulting business, advising small business owners on sustainable growth strategies. Not the explosive expansion Walsh had promised, but steady, ethical progress. We established a new tradition. The last Sunday of each month, David would bring a Walsh victim to dinner. We'd share a meal, offer guidance, and create connections that could lead to real opportunities, the kind built on skill and relationships rather than manipulation. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows and David helped clear the sigh. Dishes from one such dinner, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because our story was perfect. David still struggled with shame. I still woke sometimes worrying about his choices, but because it was honest. The $2 million remained largely intact, but its greatest value hadn't been in its amount. It had been in its power to bring truth to light, to demand accountability, and ultimately to heal the fractured relationship between a mother and son who'd lost their way in the shadows of grief, ambition, and misplaced love. "You know what Walsh got wrong?" David asked, drying the final plate. "Many things," I replied with a smile. "He taught that family connections were resources to be mined. But the truth is simpler. They're ground to be cultivated. Some seasons are harder than others, but if you tend them honestly, they'll sustain you through anything." I hung the dish towel on its designated hook. "When did you become so wise?" "When I finally started listening to my teacher." Outside, Portland rain continued its steady rhythm. Inside, for the first time in decades, everything felt exactly as it should be. Spring brought cherry blossoms to Portland's streets and David to my kitchen after his morning run. Sweaty and flushed, he moved with an energy I hadn't seen in years, not the frenetic desperation of his scheming days, but the steady vitality of someone with purpose. "Guess who I ran into on the waterfront trail?" He poured water, downing it quickly. "Sarah Mendez." I stiffened slightly. Sarah remained the one creditor we hadn't fully resolved. She'd accepted partial payment but hadn't dropped her legal claims. Her lawyer had indicated she was willing to settle, but wanted David to acknowledge wrongdoing in writing, something Walsh's defense team had advised against. "And she's opening a financial counseling practice, specifically for people recovering from investment fraud." David paused, considering his words carefully. "She asked if you'd be interested in being a silent investor." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. 6 months ago, Sarah had been preparing to sue David for $150,000. Now she was approaching his mother for legitimate business funding. "What did you tell her?" "That she should talk to you directly. No intermediaries this time." Sarah visited the following Wednesday, dressed professionally but without the armor of hostility I expected. Her handshake was firm, her presentation polished but genuine. "Mrs. Carter, I owe you an apology," she began, sitting across from me in my study. "I spent months angry at David, but I've come to understand we were both caught in Walsh's web." "Understanding doesn't erase financial harm," I replied carefully. "No, it doesn't. But I've decided to drop the lawsuit. David's testimony helped convict Walsh. That's worth more than money to me now." She adjusted her glasses. "I'm here about something else. I want to create a legitimate service that Walsh pretended to offer. Guidance for entrepreneurs, especially women and minorities, who face unique challenges accessing capital." Her business plan was thorough. She'd researched existing services, identified gaps, and developed a sliding-scale fee structure to serve various income levels. Unlike Walsh's operation, her model prioritized education over exploitation. "I need $200,000 to start. I'm offering a 25% stake in the business. If you'd prefer a loan structure with actual returns, I'm open to that too." I studied her face, looking for the calculation I'd grown accustomed to detecting. Instead, I saw determination tempered by hard-earned wisdom. "I'll consider it, but not as a secret investor. Everything will be transparent, including my involvement. And I'll want David to help design your ethics protocols." Sarah blinked rapidly, composing herself. "I welcome his input. He understands the warning signs better than anyone." 2 weeks later, we signed the partnership agreement. David drafted the ethics guidelines, a 50-page document outlining red flags for exploitative practices and procedures for handling conflicts of interest. His first-hand knowledge proved invaluable. "You know what's interesting?" Sarah remarked as David presented his work. "Walsh could have done this legitimately. People do need financial guidance. The hunger for success isn't wrong, just how some people feed it." David nodded. "He was brilliant at identifying real pain points. The tragedy is that he chose to make them worse instead of healing them." My hip continued improving, but my energy had natural limits. Some afternoons found me napping in the sunroom while David worked in the guest house, converting it into a proper counseling space for Walsh victims who needed a quiet place to process their experiences. Our Sunday dinners evolved into community gatherings. 8 to 10 people would arrive, sometimes former Walsh students, other times local business owners David was advising. The conversation ranged from practical business challenges to philosophical discussions about success and sustainability. 1. Sunday in March, David surprised everyone by announcing he'd enrolled in Portland State's MBA program. "Wait, you're going back to school?" asked Marcus, one of Walsh's former top recruiters who'd become David's first legitimate consulting client. "Part-time evening program. I realized I need real credentials, not just hard-earned wisdom. My consulting business is growing, and I want to serve clients properly." I watched the group's reaction with interest. These were people who'd been sold on shortcuts to success. Seeing David choose the traditional path sent ripples of reflection through the room. "If you can start over at 35, maybe I'm not too old at 42, murmured Janet, a former real estate agent who'd lost her license after getting caught in Walsh's unethical practices. That evening, after our guests left, David helped with dishes, a routine we'd established to decompact the day's emotional intensity. "Mom, can I ask you something personal?" "Always." "When you found out I was packing your bags for Oak Manor, what went through your mind?" I handed him a wet plate. The question had an anniversary weight to it. We were approaching the 1-year mark since that November morning. Disappointment, grief, and honestly, a kind of relief. Relief? That the facade could finally drop. For years we'd been pretending to be mother and son while actually being banker and borrower. You treating me like a burden forced us to confront what we'd become. David dried the plate methodically. I keep thinking about that morning. I was so confident, had every detail planned. I'd solved the problem of my recovering mother without consulting her because I'd stopped seeing you as a person, just as an obligation with resources. And now? Now I understand that love and respect aren't opposites of need and gratitude. They're their foundation. The following month brought unexpected news. Gregory Walsh's appeal had been denied, but he'd been offering interviews from prison, still maintaining his innocence and claiming David had been his star student until jealousy corrupted him. David's therapist suggested we skip reading these articles, but David insisted on facing them. If I run from his words now, I haven't really moved past them. His reading these interviews in my study became another ritual. David at my desk, me in the nearby reading chair, both processing Walsh's continued manipulations in real time. "Listen to this," David read. David Carter had the potential to change thousands of lives. He chose small thinking instead. His mother's money made him lazy, content with helping a handful of people instead of creating a movement. I'm disappointed in both of them. I set down my book. He's still trying to push your buttons. The scary part is, 6 months ago, that would have worked. I would have felt guilty for not thinking bigger. And now? Now I know that changing thousands of lives through ethical business is better than helping millions through questionable means. Quality over quantity applies to impact too. By summer, David's consulting practice had grown enough to hire an assistant. His MBA classes provided structure to his weeks, while the business provided practical application for his studies. He'd also started co-teaching a workshop at the community college. Recognizing financial predators, what I learned the hard way. The first time I attended his workshop, seeing 60 people listening intently as he dissected Walsh's tactics from personal experience, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride, yes, but also melancholy for all the years we'd lost to his pursuit of shortcuts. During the break, while David answered individual questions, a woman approached me. "You must be very proud," she said. "Not every mother would support a son through something like this publicly." "Not every son would earn the right to that support," I replied. She nodded thoughtfully. My daughter's going through something similar. Different mentor, same playbook. Your story gives me hope. These conversations became frequent. My presence at David's events, no longer as a silent backer but as an acknowledged partner in recovery, seemed to give families permission to hope for their own healing. Sarah's business grew rapidly. Her transparent pricing and ethical practices attracted clients wary of financial advisors after Walsh's exposure. She offered David a permanent consulting position, focusing on fraud prevention education. We could be a powerful team, she pitched, one evening over dinner. You understand the psychology of financial deception from the inside. I understand legitimate business development. Together, we could create a new model. David glanced at me before responding. I'd need to discuss this with my business partner. Of course. When can we meet with them? David smiled. She's sitting right here. The look of realization on Sarah's face was priceless. Our dining room erupted in laughter, genuine, uncomplicated joy. 2 months later, Sarah Mendez and Associates announced its expansion. The Carter Institute for Ethical Entrepreneurship. My $2 million had found its purpose, funding a comprehensive program combining financial education, psychological support, and ethical business mentorship. The Institute's first project involved partnering with local high schools to teach financial literacy, real skills, not get-rich-quick fantasies. David designed the curriculum, drawing from what he wished he'd known at 18. On the 1-year anniversary of my surgery, David arrived early to help prepare for what had become our traditional Sunday gathering. As he chopped vegetables for the soup, he paused. You know the weirdest part about that day at the hospital? Which part? I was actually trying to do the right thing. In my warped understanding, arranging Oak Manor was me being responsible for once, taking care of you properly. Responsibility without relationship is just management, I offered. Yeah, I get that now. Real caregiving requires knowing the person you're caring for, their fears, their strengths, their wishes. That evening, as our guests settled in the living room with coffee, David clinked his glass for attention. 1 year ago, I made the biggest mistake of our relationship. I valued convenience over communication, assumptions over asking. Tonight, I want to publicly acknowledge that I spent years seeing my mother as a financial resource instead of my greatest resource of all, wisdom, strength, and unconditional love. He raised his glass. To Elizabeth Carter, who taught me that the richest inheritance isn't money, property, or business connections. It's the knowledge of who you are when everything else is stripped away, and the courage to rebuild accordingly. Dory. Room fell quiet. Then, from somewhere in the back, Janet, the former real estate agent, started a slow clap that built into genuine applause. Later, washing dishes in our established rhythm, David asked, Do you think we've really turned the corner? Sometimes I worry this is all provisional, that I'll slip back into old patterns. Healing isn't binary, I said. It's not broken, then fixed. It's a daily choice to choose truth over convenience, growth over comfort. Some days will be harder than others, but we'll face them together now? Together, but as equals. Not as mother and burden, or banker and borrower. As two people who've earned each other's respect through the hardest means possible. The kitchen windows reflected our images, two figures moving in practiced coordination, the past year's events adding grace rather than tension to our movements. Outside, Portland's summer evening painted the sky in watercolors. Inside, a simple truth had emerged from months of complexity. Money had been the catalyst for our crisis, but love, examined, challenged, and ultimately redefined, had become our salvation. The $2 million remained largely intact, but its greatest value had been in its power to demand honesty, inspire transformation, and ultimately lead us to discover what we'd taken for granted: each other. In the months that followed, we continued building our new normal, David's MBA program, my involvement in the Institute's board, Sunday dinners that evolved into a support network for families navigating financial healing, small victories and occasional setbacks, all faced with the understanding that our relationship could now withstand both. The guest house had been renovated into a consultation space where David met with Walsh victims, offering guidance informed by hard-earned empathy. My own house had been renovated too, not the physical structure, but the emotional space within it. No longer did it echo with years of strained conversations and unspoken resentments. Now it hummed with purpose, forgiveness, and the ongoing work of building trust. On Christmas Eve, that symbolic day that had started our journey toward truth, David and I sat in the living room watching snow fall on Portland streets. The newspaper lay on the coffee table, featuring an article about the Institute's success in its first year of operation. "Remember last year's call about Christmas?" David asked quietly. "You said you had things to take care of. I thought you meant holiday errands." I did. The most important one being figuring out what my relationship with my son was really worth. Turns out it was worth everything, including making you earn it properly. David leaned over and kissed my cheek, a gesture that had become natural again, not performative. "For what it's worth," he said. "I'm glad you made me fight for us. Easy love isn't love at all. It's just comfort wearing a disguise." Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, warm and secure, we'd finally learned that the most valuable inheritance was never about money at all. It was about having the courage to demand truth, the wisdom to offer second chances, and the strength to build something real from the ruins of what was false. The $2 million eventually would fund scholarships, business loans, and community programs. But its first and greatest investment had been in the possibility of healing between a mother and son who'd lost their way, then found it again through the very crisis that had threatened to divide them forever. In the end, we'd learned that family. Wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or real estate portfolios. It's measured in the richness of relationships rebuilt, the abundance of trust restored, and the compound interest of love that grows stronger through every challenge we face together. 2. Years after my surgery, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, adjusting a navy blue suit jacket. The PBS crew was arriving in 30 minutes to interview David and me for their documentary series, Second Chances, Families Who Defied Expectations. "Mom, you look professional," David commented from the doorway. He wore a simple charcoal gray suit, not the expensive designer brands of his Walsh days, but something solid and well-tailored. His MBA pin glinted on his lapel. "I still can't believe they want to feature us." "Believe it. The Institute has helped over 500 people this year. That's newsworthy." The interview revealed how far we'd traveled. The producer, Miranda Chang, had researched extensively, uncovering details about Walsh's conviction, the victim support network, and the innovative business model we'd developed. "Mrs. Carter," Miranda asked during the interview, "what was the exact moment you knew your relationship with David could be saved?" I considered carefully. It wasn't a single moment. It was when he chose truth over comfort repeatedly. When he testified against Walsh despite the personal risk. When he started helping other victims instead of focusing solely on his own recovery. And David, do you think the financial crisis was necessary for this transformation? Necessary? David leaned forward. "I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but for me, yes. I needed to hit rock bottom to understand that the foundation I'd built my life on was sand. Real success, the kind that lasts, requires bedrock of integrity." After the filming, David and I drove to the Carter Institute's new headquarters, a restored Victorian house in Portland's historic district. The purchase had taken almost half my $2 million, but seeing victims of financial fraud walk through its doors seeking help made every penny worthwhile. Inside, Sarah greeted us with exciting news. "We've been approached by the National Association of Financial Counselors. They want to franchise our model nationally. David's face animated with controlled excitement, no longer the manic energy of his get-rich-quick days, but the steady enthusiasm of someone who'd found purpose. That would mean helping thousands instead of hundreds. Tens of thousands, potentially, Sarah corrected. But only if we're careful about quality control. Remember what we learned. Expansion without integrity is just Walsh by another name, that. Evening, at our regular Sunday dinner, a new face appeared. Michael Chen, a federal financial crimes investigator who'd followed Walsh's case. I came to learn from you, Michael admitted over Sarah's famous chili. Walsh-type schemes are proliferating online. We need community-based solutions, not just legal ones. David engaged him intensely. The warning signs are universal. Pressure to exploit family relationships, promises of unrealistic returns, isolation from traditional support networks. But the vulnerability varies. People seeking mentorship are inherently trusting. Could you help train our agents? Michael asked. Teach them to recognize these patterns from a victim's perspective? This led to David's next evolution, consulting with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. He began traveling to speak at law enforcement conferences, sharing insights only someone who'd lived both sides could provide. 1 month later, I faced my own unexpected turn. Dr. Rodriguez called with news from my annual checkup, a small shadow on my lung X-ray. Further tests revealed early-stage cancer, caught thanks to the imaging they'd done because of my hip surgery. David was in Seattle for a consulting job when I called with the news. He returned immediately, walking into my hospital room with none of the hesitation that had marked his last medical visit. "Tell me everything," he said, pulling a chair close to my bed. "Treatment options, timetable, what you need from me." "It's early stage, radiation therapy, maybe minor surgery, 6 months of treatment. The prognosis is excellent, but you'll need help, real help, not just check-ins and errands." "I'm not going to resist assistance this time," I assured him. We've been through too much for that kind of pride. David moved back into the main house, taking leave from his consulting practice to manage my care. He transformed our daily routine into a military-precise support system, medications, doctor's appointments, nutrition planning. But unlike his attempt at managing my hip surgery, this time every decision included my input. Afternoons often found us in the garden. David had taken up horticulture therapy at his MBA program advisor's suggestion. "Watching things grow patiently teaches delayed gratification," he explained, showing me his tomato plants. "You mean unlike cryptocurrency?" "Unlike everything I was chasing before," he laughed. "Plants don't care about your ambition. They respond to consistency and care." During my radiation treatments, David implemented what he called waiting room university. He'd bring business journals, case studies, and often Sarah or other institute staff to discuss strategy. Our oncology center's waiting room became an informal classroom. One morning, as we waited for my treatment, David hesitated before speaking. "Mom, I need to tell you something. I've been offered a position with the University of Oregon." My heart skipped, not from fear, but from interest. "Tell me more." "They want to create a center for ethical business practices. They want me to direct it. It would mean relocating to Eugene, but you're worried about leaving me during treatment." "Among other concerns." I set down my magazine. "Remember what you told Miranda about making decisions based on truth rather than convenience? This falls under that principle." The conversation evolved into a family meeting that included Sarah. We developed a plan. David would defer the position for 4 months, allowing him to oversee critical phases of my treatment. After that, Sarah would relocate the Institute's main office to Eugene, partnering with the university. I would maintain my Portland residence but spend extended time in Eugene when health permitted. "We're building something bigger than a single location," Sarah observed. "Maybe this expansion serves our mission better than staying static." News of David's appointment spread quickly. the Portland Business Journal ran a feature titled, "From Fraud to Faculty: David Carter's Journey from Financial Predator to Professor." The article's release brought unexpected consequences. I began receiving letters, some supportive, others critical. One particularly harsh letter accused me of enabling David by buying his reputation with your $2 million. David found me reading it one evening, tears on my cheeks. "Let me see." He read silently, then crumpled the letter. Before, I would have internalized this, worried about my image, about perception. Now I know the truth of where we are matters, more than anyone's opinion of how we got here. But they're right, aren't they? I did use money to create opportunities for you. No, you used resources to create possibilities for redemption. I had to walk through the doors myself. No one can purchase integrity. They can only invest in the environment where it grows. My cancer treatment concluded successfully that December. To celebrate, the Institute organized our first annual Second Chances Gala. The event raised $300,000 for financial fraud victim support services. Standing at the podium that night, I looked out at a room filled with success stories. Former Walsh victims who'd rebuilt businesses, marriages saved through financial therapy, young entrepreneurs learning ethical practices. 2 years ago, I thought the worst thing my son could do was pack my bags for a nursing home. Today, I understand it was the catalyst for our greatest transformation. I paused, finding David's supportive smile in the crowd. The question isn't whether crisis will come. It's whether we'll have the courage to emerge more honest than we entered. David's speech followed mine. My mother didn't buy my redemption. She bought me time. Time to prove I could earn back trust. Time to learn that shortcuts to success usually lead to longer routes to failure. Time to understand that family wealth isn't measured in inheritance, but in the richness of relationships we're willing to fight for. The standing ovation felt different from the applause David had chased in his Walsh days. This recognition wasn't for performance, but for persistence. For the unsexy, daily work of rebuilding integrity one choice at a time. 6 months later, at David's first university lecture, I sat in the back row of the auditorium. His course, Ethics in the Digital Marketplace, had overflowed its enrollment capacity. How many of you have been approached by a business mentor promising extraordinary returns? David began. Half the students raised their hands. How many know someone who has? Every hand went up. For the next 90 minutes, he deconstructed Walsh's methodology while building frameworks for ethical success. Students asked probing questions. Some shared stories of narrowly avoiding similar schemes. After class, a young woman approached hesitantly. "Professor Carter? My boyfriend is involved in something that sounds exactly like what you described. I don't know how to help him without seeming unsupportive." David's response demonstrated hard-won wisdom. Support means helping someone find truth, not avoiding it. Document the red flags. Ask detailed questions about business models. Real mentors welcome scrutiny, predators resist it. Walking across the Eugene campus afterward, David mused, "Strange how many variations of the same con exist. But the solution remains constant. Education, transparency, community support, and courage," I added. You can't teach integrity, only demonstrate what it looks like in practice. Our first year in Eugene flew by. My health remained strong, with 6-month checkups showing no recurrence. David's academic position flourished. The Carter Institute expanded its services, now operating in 5 states. One evening, as we reviewed the Institute's annual report, David noticed something significant. "Mom, look at this statistic. 47% of the people we've helped this year had no prior relationship to Walsh's scheme. We're not just healing past victims, we're preventing future ones." The realization prompted our next project, creating a high school curriculum on recognizing financial manipulation. Working with educators and counselors, we developed age-appropriate lessons teaching young people to spot the warning signs of financial predators. That spring marked 3 years since my surgery. David suggested commemorating the anniversary with a new tradition, evaluating our progress against initial goals. Remember my original conditions? I pulled out a notebook from that first confrontation. Financial transparency, therapy, volunteer, work. They seem almost quaint now. They were stepping stones, David acknowledged, but the foundation they rested on, accountability, growth, service, those remain the pillars of everything we've built. We'd transcended the transactional relationship that had characterized our pre-crisis dynamic. David no longer asked for money because he no longer needed to. His university salary, combined with consulting fees and book royalties from his recently published Recovering from Financial Fraud, A Victim's Guide, provided financial stability. More importantly, our conversations had depth and reciprocity. David sought my advice on complex ethical dilemmas in his work. I consulted him on strategic decisions for the Institute. We'd become genuine colleagues in the mission of preventing financial exploitation. That summer, PBS released Second Chances, nationally. Our segment triggered hundreds of emails from viewers sharing similar stories. But one message stood out, from Janet, the former real estate agent who'd attended our early Sunday dinners. I've completed my license renewal requirements and returned to real estate. But now I specialize in helping fraud victims rebuild their credit to buy homes. Watching you both taught me, our scars become our expertise if we're willing to share them. The ripple effects of our transformation continued expanding. By year 4, David had been promoted to associate dean. His center published research on online financial scams that influenced federal regulation. I'd become a sought-after speaker on family financial dynamics and elder financial protection. Our Sunday dinners evolved into a Portland institution. Local restaurants started contributing food, and we'd moved the gatherings to a community center to accommodate growing attendance. David co-facilitated discussions while I focused on one-on-one connections with newcomers. One memorable evening, a man in his 60s introduced himself as Arthur Walsh, Gregory's brother. I came to apologize, he said simply. I refused to. Believe Greg was harmful. Thought you were all overreacting. Then I started researching his methods, talking to victims. I was wrong. David's response surprised everyone, including himself. Your brother's tactics hurt many people, including himself. The system that allows such predators is what we fight now, not individuals. This perspective had taken years to cultivate. Early in his recovery, David had struggled with the desire for revenge. Now, he understood that energy directed toward prevention helped more people than anger directed backward. By our 5th anniversary of truth-telling, the statistics were remarkable. The Carter Institute had helped 2,300 financial fraud victims. David's university program graduated 150 ethics-focused business students annually. Our high school curriculum reached 50,000 students across 15 states. Yet our personal measure of success remained elegantly simple: the ability to have difficult conversations with mutual respect, trust earned daily rather than assumed, and the knowledge that our relationship could withstand both crisis and contentment. The final scene of our documentary captured this evolution perfectly. David and me, gardening together in silence. No grand declarations or orchestrated sentiment, just 2 people who'd remembered how to be family. Many viewers will wonder, the narrator summarized, whether Elizabeth's $2 million was the key to their reconciliation. The truth is more nuanced. It was never about the money's existence, but about the choices its revelation forced them to make. As the credits rolled in the screening room, I felt something settle into place, the peaceful knowledge that our hardest journey had led to our most meaningful destination. Not just recovery, but wisdom. Not just forgiveness, but understanding. Not just family, but friendship. The $2 million had indeed changed our lives, but not by being spent, by being the mirror that reflected our true selves, flaws and all, until we finally had the courage to look honestly at what we saw. 5 years after my surgery, I found myself standing in a cemetery on a crisp October morning. Not for a funeral, but for a different kind of closure. David stood beside me as we placed flowers at his father's grave, the first time we'd visited together since David was a child. I used to come here alone, I admitted. Usually, on his birthday. I'd tell him about you, about how I was trying to keep the promise I made him, to raise you well. David traced his fingers along the cold marble. I don't think he'd have wanted us to carry so much guilt for so long. Probably not. But guilt shapes us until we transform it into purpose. That afternoon, David announced his next venture, a fellowship program pairing business students with recovering fraud victims. The students would provide free consulting while learning to recognize manipulative practices firsthand. Real-world ethics aren't taught in textbooks, he explained to the university board. They're forged through actual encounters with moral complexity. The following month brought unexpected visitors to our Portland home. A film production company had optioned the rights to our story for a feature film. The writer, Melissa Torres, spent a week interviewing us, capturing nuances beyond what the documentary had shown. What's the most important truth you want viewers to understand? Melissa asked during our final session. David and I exchanged glances before I responded. That family healing isn't a destination. It's a daily practice. Every conversation requires choosing honesty over harmony when they conflict. And that wealth only has value when shared, David added. My mother taught me that money can't buy integrity, but it can fund opportunities to develop it. The film option brought a substantial payment, enough to establish a permanent endowment for the Carter Institute. During our estate planning meeting, I made an announcement that surprised even David. I want to give away the rest of my $2 million during my lifetime. Not all at once, but strategically over the next 5 years. David raised an eyebrow. To the Institute? Partially, but also to emerging programs that align with our mission. I want to see the impact while I'm alive to appreciate it. This decision led to creating the Second Chances Grant Program, funding innovative approaches to financial recovery education. Applications flowed in from across the country, each proposal a reminder of how widespread financial exploitation had become. Our grant review process became a family affair. Every Sunday, between dinner preparations, David and I would read applications aloud. Some stories echoed our own journey. Others revealed new patterns of deception we hadn't encountered. One application particularly moved us. A grandmother seeking funding to teach financial literacy at women's shelters. Her own sister had lost everything to an investment scam that promised to secure their golden years. This is exactly what we should support, David said, making notes. Grassroots education that prevents exploitation before it starts. The grant program gained attention when a recipient, Dr. Patricia Williams, published breakthrough research linking childhood financial trauma to adult susceptibility to fraud. Her work established the Carter Institute as a leader in preventive financial education. That summer, I turned 83. David organized a modest celebration at our favorite restaurant, where friends and institute staff gathered. Sarah presented a leather-bound book, signatures and stories from everyone we'd helped over 5 years. Reading through those pages later that night, I found myself crying for the first time in months. Not from sadness, but from understanding the geometric progression of our healing. Each life we'd touched had touched others, creating ripples far beyond our imagining. The following autumn brought challenges that tested our reconstructed foundation. My hip began showing signs of wear, arthritis settling into the joint like time moving in. Simultaneously, funding for David's university center faced budget cuts. This time, Instead of rushing to solve problems independently, we approach them together. The hip replacement lasted 5 years, longer than the doctors predicted, I told David over our morning coffee. I'm not worried about eventual discomfort. I'm grateful for the mobility it's given me. And the university situation might actually be an opportunity, he reflected. Private sector funding could give us more flexibility to develop programs they can't. We started meeting with potential corporate sponsors, companies interested in supporting ethics education. Several had their own histories with financial misconduct and sought ways to rebuild public trust. During one such meeting, the CEO of a major real estate firm leaned forward intently. Mr. Carter, what would you say to someone who's built success on questionable practices and now wants to make amends? David's answer carried weight I couldn't have imagined him possessing years earlier. Transparency starts with acknowledging the full truth. To yourself first, then to those affected. Amends isn't just about saying sorry. It's about permanently changing the systems that enabled harm. By Christmas, we'd secured funding from 3 major corporations, each contributing not just money, but also their own fraud prevention expertise to our programs. The University Center not only survived but expanded, adding graduate-level courses on corporate ethics and whistleblower protection. Our Christmas Eve tradition continued. 5 years after that fateful call, when David invited me home for the holidays, still unaware of my financial situation, we sat in the same living room. This time, David's fiancée, Patricia, joined us, along with Sarah and her new husband. Remember when I thought managing you would be a quick holiday task? David asked, sharing the story with our extended family for the first time. I remember thinking my money was the only thing you valued about me, I added. We were both wrong, but for the right reasons. Patricia, whom David had met through the Institute, shared her perspective as someone who'd witnessed our transformation from the outside. Watching you two work through conflict rather than around it teaches me daily. You show that difficult conversations strengthen relationships rather than threaten them. That night, after our guests departed, David presented me with a gift, a first edition of a book I'd mentioned loving during our long recovery conversations, Emily Dickinson's poetry. Inside the front cover, he'd inscribed, "To Mom, who taught me that the most valuable inheritance isn't what we leave behind, but what we become together. Your wisdom cost me dearly and paid me handsomely. Love, David." 6 months later, the Carter Institute received recognition from the Federal Trade Commission for our work in fraud prevention education. The ceremony in Washington, D.C., marked our program's expansion to national prominence. Standing at the podium, I realized something profound. My journey from abandoned wife to widow to fraud victim's mother had prepared me uniquely for this moment. Every hardship had contained seeds of future resilience. Financial predators prey on isolation, I told the gathering. They weaponize shame and exploit the human desire for quick solutions to long-standing problems. The antidote isn't just education, it's connection. David's contribution to the ceremony came in the form of a policy proposal he'd developed with other ethics experts. The framework they'd created for protecting vulnerable adults from financial exploitation gained attention from legislators seeking reform. After the ceremony, walking through the cherry blossoms near the Washington Monument, David shared news that represented another evolution. Patricia's pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother. The joy that flooded through me carried unique quality, not the desperate hope of reclaiming lost time, but the steady appreciation of present connection. Our relationship now could hold this expansion with grace rather than anxiety. Will you be a controlling grandmother? David teased. I'll be a wise one. There's a difference between guidance and manipulation, though you'll probably have to remind me occasionally. We flew back to Portland on a late evening flight. As the city lights appeared through the airplane window, scattered constellations of human striving, I reflected on our journey's true beginning. It hadn't started with my surgery or David's desperate need. It had begun when crisis forced honesty between us, creating space for authentic connection. "Mom," David said softly, "do you ever wish we'd found this closeness without the crisis?" "I wish we hadn't needed pain to teach us truth, but I don't regret the education. Some lessons can only be learned by living through them." 6 months later, Eva Marie Carter was born, 7 pounds of promise wrapped in possibility. Holding her in the hospital, I felt the circle completing not with repetition, but with elevation. This granddaughter would inherit none of our past struggles, but all our accumulated wisdom. David watched me with Eva, noting how naturally I held her compared to his memory of his infancy. "You're more relaxed this time. I learned not to carry guilt for things I can't control, and that babies need presence more than perfection." Our final Sunday dinner that year brought together 50 people, former victims, current students, institute staff, and families finding their way back from financial devastation. The community room buzzed with conversations in multiple languages, dreams shared across cultural divides. At the center of it all, David moved with quiet confidence, no longer performing for approval, but serving with purpose. Sarah had integrated financial literacy into her immigration support services. Patricia was developing art therapy programs for fraud recovery. As the evening wound down, with Eva sleeping in my arms and conversations softening to murmurs, I understood our story's ultimate lesson. Inheritance flows in multiple directions. Not just from parents to children, but from crisis to wisdom, from isolation to community, from deception to truth. The $2 million had become something far more valuable than its original sum. It had transformed into education that prevented future loss, support that healed past wounds, and connections that created lasting change. That night, preparing for bed, I found David's light still on. He was writing in the same notebook where he'd once recorded truths I'd asked him to face. "What are you writing now?" "A manifesto for the fellowship program. Title, The Currency of Integrity, Why Trust Compounds Faster Than Money." I smiled, kissing his forehead as I'd done when he was young, but now with respect rather than worry. "Your father would be proud." So would his father. Generational healing starts somewhere. Might as well be us. Outside, Portland rain began its familiar percussion against the windows. Inside, surrounded by evidence of lives rebuilt and futures secured, I finally understood the mathematics of love. It multiplies through division, grows through vulnerability, and compounds most richly when invested in truth. The best inheritance I could leave wasn't measured in bank statements or property deeds. It was measured in David's capacity to face difficult truths, in Ava's future freedom from our past mistakes, and in the countless strangers who would benefit from a mother and son who chose healing over hiding, growth over comfort, and each other over convenience. As sleep approached, I realized our story wasn't ending. It was finally beginning. Every dawn would bring new chances to practice the wisdom we'd earned so dearly. That wealth without integrity is poverty, that family without honesty is performance, and that the richest legacy is a life lived authentically, whatever the cost. Thixi. Last thought before dreams claimed me was a grateful one. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrive wrapped in our worst fears. Our crisis had contained our cure. Our deepest pain had seeded our highest growth. And our $2 million had bought us something priceless, the chance to discover who we could become when forced to face who we really were. In the end, that was the ultimate inheritance. Not security for the future, but clarity for the present, and courage to continue becoming the family we'd always wanted to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.